Russel Brand blasted the Pentagon after recent reports that it once again misplaced funds. Surprise, surprise. Let's watch.
The Pentagon have just failed another audit.
The Defense Department's taking a sizable chunk of your paycheck. However, it's unable to prove how it's actually spending those tax dollars.
For the 6th year in a row now and counting, the Pentagon has failed its yearly audit.
I think after a while, you're going to have to stop auditing them. It seems pointless. Are you going to do an audit this year? I'm sorry, it's just another blank form from us.
We're working on improving our process.
Well, I would think so, given that you can't pass an audit. Doesn't that seem extraordinary that a department that's responsible for world events, significant world events, wars, at a time of escalating war across the entire planet, can't account for where the money is going? Doesn't that seem extraordinary to you? Almost unacceptable. Asked by a reporter when the Pentagon expects to pass an audit, Singh said that she can't predict the future. It's not the future. This is not... So you're basically asking me to predict the future? Well, not really. I'm asking you, sort of, when the money comes in, just write that down, good. And then when you sort of spend it, okay, God, yeah, well, just write down where you spent it. No, I can't. Listen, I'm not magic, okay? I'm not got a crystal ball here. And if we did have, we'd take that damn thing and we'd throw it straight at Moscow. But when the Pentagon did, she would let them know. It's actually resorting to sarcasm. Why are they 14-year-old kids? It's like mean girls running the Pentagon. Stay free. See it first on Rumble.
It was a very effective, hilarious, justified skewering of the Pentagon failing their 6th straight audit. There's so much to say about this. The government can't keep track of the money it ships overseas for foreign policy, for war making. The government wouldn't let you get away with this, wouldn't let any person, U.S. taxpayers, get away with this. We get audited for our screw-ups, but the government, it doesn't matter. They can misappropriate as much funds as they want, and they never get in any trouble. Russel Brand points out how the officials basically in charge over there don't even care. They're not fazed by this at all because they know there's not going to be any accountability. And it's accepted as kind of standard operating procedure for a government to spend our money and not even be able to keep track of how it's being spent. And we don't talk about this as a crisis of democracy, but isn't it? How can we as voters exercise control over our government? They can't even tell us how and where and why they're spending our money. How are we able to put in accountability and say, well, we want money spent for this purpose, but not that purpose? We can't even do that because they won't even be honest with us or themselves, frankly, about how the money is being spent.
Yeah, this British guy is more outraged than most Americans are about this regular catastrophe. 6th audit in a row. And it's not like they didn't try and track down the assets and the liabilities. They have $3.8 trillion in assets and $4 trillion in liabilities. They had 1,600 auditors and 700 site visits. That is insane to put in that much effort. Just imagine how expensive that was to try and track down where all of the money is going. That's insane. And they still failed the audit. It's absolutely absurd. I think that the Pentagon shouldn't be allowed to get more money until they pass an audit. It is unreasonable in a democracy, you're right, Robbie, to have the Department of Defense and the Pentagon be given this amount of money for what? For giving weapons to our allies that we're going to find out through leaked documents when we read Ken Klippenstein on The Intercept. I mean, seriously, what does an American citizen have to do to understand where public dollars are going, especially when they're going to wars, to potentially supporting acts of violence that will then put us at risk of retaliation? I really think that's the consequence of this, because other countries, especially countries in the Middle East, hold the United States accountable morally for who we send weapons to and what they do with those weapons. If we're living in a democracy, the people our government serves should be accountable to us and how we feel about that happening, because that absolutely puts us at risk as well. So I'm very grateful for Russel Brand, who is not, I don't think he's an American citizen, perhaps he is, but he definitely grew up in the UK because he has that accent and he does a really good American accent when he's interpreting the Pentagon. But it's not just a blank sheet, like he said. They put in a great effort and still couldn't track the money down. So it's good he's pointing this out.
Yeah, you talk about some of this money going toward weapons to our ostensible allies, and time again, we've seen how, well, then once those weapons are out there, they're not tracked. They don't necessarily go to the appropriate people. And in fact, terrorist groups Well, and sometimes that we were allied with at the time, right? We were allied with Osama bin Laden in the Cold War, and then he turns around and launches a terrorist attack against the United States. But we have, weapons that we left in the Middle East with, again, so-called allies were then picked up by the Islamic State. So that's, with the actual, when it's turned into resources, those get misappropriated and lost as well. But here we're just talking about even the funding, just the funds that buy those things. The receipts aren't being kept in any acceptable ledger. You mentioned 1,600 employees doing this audit. That's so many government employees to ultimately produce an agency that is not meeting its basic financial responsibilities, its responsibilities to the American taxpayer, because this is our money. It's taken from us it's not voluntary whether you pay taxes or not. The money's taken from you, and it's spent towards X, Y, and Z purposes, and there's no way to hold them accountable if we don't know what they're doing. So I was glad to see Russell Brand making fun of them there. And this, as you point out, this entire matter needs more attention. I know it gets written about at Reason, a libertarian publication where I also work. The Intercept has done great work on this topic as well. I really hope it's front and center in people's minds as they consume the news and try to hold the administration accountable. It's 6 years, so it's certainly not beginning with the Biden administration by any stretch of the imagination. This is as bipartisan a problem as you can have, or rather a problem created by both parties in equal measure, something that should frustrate all Americans, but is just maybe is not a sexy enough story, but certainly it's an important one.
Yeah, when I think about, the lawmakers that are trying to do something about this, there was proposed legislation. It was a bipartisan bill. But basically they said, if you're the Pentagon, you have to pass an audit in the 2024 fiscal year. But the penalty is they would have to give back 1% of what they were allocated. That is so much smaller than the average tax penalty of unpaid taxes. That is insane. 1%? They would gladly give the 1% back and just not even pay 1,600 auditors. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And now they're saying also, as a part of this bill, that it should be an independent audit. And if they don't have a clean audit, then they get the 1% back. So it's just a ridiculous situation. Does that mean that now Congress is going to have to allocate money to the independent auditors? Also, do they have the security clearance to be doing any of this? It's just a problem with no obvious solution other than we shouldn't be giving the Pentagon money if they can't account for where it's going. And this just tells me, someone who studied CIA history and what the National Security Administration is up to on a regular basis, that a lot of these weapons are going to support covert operations. They don't want the American public to know about it. Obviously, that's not why they're telling us. They very clearly have the technology and personnel to be able to account for all of these assets and liabilities. It's that they intentionally don't want to. That's very obvious to me.
It's a great point. Thank you so much. We'll have more Rising right after this.